Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm going to go over today how to find support and resistance levels for day trading stocks. Had a couple of requests from people to see how I come up with levels. So I'm going to jump into stock here. This is Ford, stock symbol is F. Sorry if it's cut off there on the top left. What I like to do when I start off my day pre-market is look at a higher time frame. 30 minutes is one of my favorites. So I can see the trend over a larger time frame, and it's not too big to where I can't see where certain price levels reacted, for example, where the spikes were, where the wicks were. So I like 30 minutes, and I like to snap on trend lines. So the first thing I like to do is snap on some trend lines, and in order to do that, what I'm looking for is wicks. So on Ford here, there's a wick at about 15 there, and I like to connect it to the next wick on the top. So we have a trend line there. On the bottom, we have a trend line that's touching in 3 places right there. So that's kind of where I start off. I start off by drawing trend lines. So here I'm looking at the 15-minute, and now I'm going to also snap on horizontal lines, and that's going to show me where the stock has went up to and rejected, or where it's went down to and bounced off of. So here we can see $15 area as a pretty good resistance level, right? It's hit that area 3 times in the last few days. And at the bottom, we have about 1390, 1380s as a support, where it's also hit there before and bounced up. So this is a quick way for me to find out where support and resistance is on Ford. At least for the day today, it gives me a guide on what to look for as I'm in and out of these trades. All right, so let's look at a couple more. I'm going to type in CYN, the symbol here. This is CYN. And this stock has had quite a bit of a run up over the last few days here, running from $1 all the way up to about $7 almost. So I'm looking at the 4-hour chart here to see if I can get a big picture idea again of the trend, and if I spot any sort of trend lines. And we're right near the bottom of that trend line right there. Now on the 30-minute, you can see more granular details where the stock spiked up, it came back down, but it's bounced off that trend line that we drew. So, this is how I look at trend. This is how I identify those areas that I'm looking for when I'm day trading. And I'm looking at a resistance level to see, if I see a bounce in this stock, where can I expect it to turn around? Or what are the key levels where I can expect price to make some sort of move that would get me interested in either going long or short. Or if I'm already short, then I want to know, what's a good place for me to get out, right? Cover my short. And if on CYN, if I was going to go long, it seems like the support's right around $3 here, right? 310. And my exit would probably close to around that 460s area, because I would expect the sellers to still be there in that area. So this is sort of a very simple way that I look at trend and how I map out support and resistance levels pre-market before I even start trading the stock when the market opens. So this is a great exercise for you guys to go through these charts, draw lines, and don't be afraid to mess up. You'll notice me draw lines, delete them, redo the lines, and that's okay, because this is not a perfect science here. This is all, as the chart changes, you want to adjust your thinking, right? So there's going to be new levels made, new price levels, new trends. So let's look at one more here. This is Apple, and you can see it's been trending downwards pretty consistently from that top it put in around 180s. So again, the first thing I like to do is look for any obvious levels or any obvious trend lines that I can snap on. So I see one here but a bigger one is there. Now, the longer the days that it covers this trend line, the more time that I have covered, the more important I feel the trend line should be. So if you can snap one on that's that long, I would say go for it. Again, on the bottom, I see a fairly obvious support around the 154 area, 153. So, I'm going to switch constantly back and forth between these different time frames to, see if I can spot granular details, maybe some wicks into those areas. So I'm looking at it here, 153.20s. And we had a couple wicks down there, as you can see, from a couple days ago, then the one a few days ago. So I'm going to pop a line there at 153.20s. And we got a line at 155 here that was just made yesterday, where it bounced off that line. That was right near the close yesterday. So, I've got my support mapped out here in Apple. I would say a long would work well, if it dipped down into 154s, 153.30. Because look at it this way, right? You got your support right there, or in that demand zone, as many people would call it. That's where the buyers would be interested in buying Apple, around that 154 area. How far can it go? I would say maybe up to 164, 165. That's where your trend line is sort of topping out there. If price were to touch those lines, I would be looking to exit out of my position in those areas. So again, this kind of gives you a good baseline before the market opens to see where's support, where's resistance, and that will tell you, where you can expect buyers to step in, or where you can expect sellers to step in, right? So kind of gives you an idea about where the supply and demand is on any given stock. So it's a great exercise to go through and do this before the market opens. So when you're scalping and Apple drops down to like 154 and is making a lot of wicks in those areas, you already know that there's support in that area. So a long trade would probably give you a good risk to reward ratio, because you're not going to be risking that much lower below support, right? If you did make a trade. Whereas your upside is pretty huge, right? So if you're risking, $1 to the downside, but you got about $5 or $6 to the upside. So this is kind of the benefit of doing this analysis of support and resistance. Let's look at one more here. This is DKNG DraftKings. On the daily, you can see some obvious support levels here at 1349, and the low was 1306. And also the low from yesterday, which was 1388. So now, again, I'm going to look at a higher time frame, 30 minutes. Let's try to spot some obvious trends here. Where can we snap on a trend line that makes sense, right? That touches the most top points. So trend lines can be drawn from the top down, like this. And you can also draw trend lines that are support trend lines. That would be from the bottom up. So I snap one on here that looks pretty good. It respected that line pretty well just up until yesterday. So I'm going to remove that. And again, like I said, don't be afraid to draw lines, play around with them, check the levels, and then redraw lines, because that's what this is all about. It's about constantly looking at price levels to understand what's going on, to give you a better idea of where support and resistance levels are on a given stock. So again, the obvious resistance level I've mapped out there near the $16 area, where it's topped out several times. It was the previous support from looks like a week ago in that area, where it bounced off a couple times there in that 1560 area. That's a great example of support turning into resistance. I'm going to snap on another line here, a trend line that's going to be going upwards now. This sort of tells me that if a stock were to keep going up, where can I expect it to bounce off? So again, this is not an exact science. This is kind of where you're expecting to see the price react to those lines. So, it may react the way you want it to, it may not, but it does give you a better risk-reward scenario where you can plan your trades better, right? So this is a nice uptrending trend line. We've got resistance above in the 17 area, so you can expect it to maybe pop to that level, if there's a big push up into the stock. But It did dump down pretty good yesterday, so if it pops back up to the 16s, I would say that's a pretty good area to look for short and maybe carry it all the way down to like that support area of 1380s, $14 area. So again, this is mapping out support and resistance levels. Let's look at one more. This is Dash, D-A-S-H, DoorDash. And I always start with the daily and then drill down to looking at maybe the weekly to see. Because on the daily, if it's too choppy, I like to see the weekly, see where there's clear levels. And I see one here. The only level here to see is 70.04, looks like, which is the low, 52-week low, or the lowest point it's ever been. So this is interesting. It's made a double top here over the last couple days. It's an obvious downtrend. It popped up pre-market on, looks like there were some earnings that came out either after hours yesterday or maybe this morning. So again, popping in a trend line, and now I'm looking for horizontal resistance areas where this stock could potentially bounce up to and then reject. So this will help me figure out how to plan my trade. This is going to help me figure out where I can see obvious areas where the stock will either bounce up from or go lower. So I'm going to draw on another trend line here at the top that also makes sense. So if you got a downtrending stock, I've drawn two trend lines there, and I would definitely be bearish on this, but I would need to pop up higher in order to short the stock because we do have support down at 70s, and I would be less likely to short it in this area. Again, and if we drop below 70, you can see much lower on Dash. So this is how I map out support and resistance levels pre-market. Again, this just helps me see the market more clearly when I am scalping. Sometimes I don't see the daily chart or the 4-hour chart when I'm actively trading. So the lines really help me. I rely on these lines to help me get in and out of stocks, and more importantly, help me plan out my risk, where I'm going to stop out and what my targets would be if I am in a trade. Let's look at one more. This is Virgin Galactic Holdings, SPCE. This is a 30-minute chart, and we can see obvious support right there at 670. That's the lowest the stock's ever been, and fairly easy to see here that we're going to expect some sort of support in that 670 area. And the other observation you can make here, it looks pretty terrible on the daily here, but if it does break that 670 area, we can see a dump further below that. But because it's so overextended to the downside, I would almost expect 670 to hold up here. So so I would really use that as a critical support level if I were to take these trades. Now, if I zoom into the 15-minute, where would I take this trade? I would probably short this, but I would need a pop, up to that support of 721 that's now turned into resistance. You see it dropped under there, tried to pop up, bounced off that line again. So, again, this is how I map out the support and resistance levels in the stock. And while I'm day trading, I use these lines to help me identify where I should get in, where I should get out. This is a great practice to get into pre-market. Before you get into any day trades, you want to be looking and doing this analysis pre-market. Looking at NEO here, overall, again, it's pretty bearish. I would be leaning short, but I would need a pop in order to get short on the stock. Now, it did make the pop pre-market back up to about 16.15 or so. And, I would put orders to short this in that area with a stop above that resistance level. Okay, so again, this is how I'm mapping out my support level. That's where I map out my resistance level. And then I figure out what my stop is going to be, and then I plan my trade around these areas, right? And if I were to short this thing, where would I cover? What's your best guess on where I would cover this? Let's say I'm short right now pre-market. Where would be your best guess for where I would want to cover this stock? I'll give you guys a second to think about it. That's right. It's going to be the line that I drew below 1486. That's an obvious support area where it bounced up from yesterday, and I would expect it to do something similar in that area. So if I'm short, I'm looking to cover 1486. Now, if it breaks 1486, then maybe leave a little piece on for further downside move, or maybe reshort it, right, if it goes up to that level. So again, this is kind of the power of using support and resistance lines to map out your trades. So when price does reach those areas, you kind of understand what the structure of the price is, and you kind of understand how much lower it can go or where price could potentially reverse from. So this is, again, super important to do pre-market. So I'm actually popping in some orders here like we talked about on NIO, and if the stock does go to those levels, I'm going to get short. If it doesn't, then I'm okay with missing the trade, because again, I don't want to be shorting this thing around that $15 $14.90 mark, because that's my support area, right? So I'm expecting a bounce up from that area. So if I get in short there and it bounces up, I'm going to be looking at a losing trade. Or more importantly, my stop is going to be way too far, right? Using support and resistance levels before you get into day trades will greatly help you while you're actively scalping and day trading. So I hope you guys learned something in this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.